Royalty and Ruin, Chapter 37. Zedekiah fails his last chance. In the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army came against Jerusalem. 2 Kings chapter 25, verse 1. The outlook for Judah was hopeless. "Behold, I am against you," the Lord himself declared through Ezekiel. "I will pour out my indignation on you. I will blow against you with the fire of my wrath, and deliver you into the hands of brutal men who are skillful to destroy." Ezekiel chapter 21, verse 3 and 31. The Egyptians attempted to come to the rescue, and the Chaldeans, in order to keep them back, abandoned their siege for a while. Hope sprang up in Zedekiah's heart, and he sent a messenger to Jeremiah, asking him to pray to God for the Hebrew nation. The prophet's fearful answer was, "Do not deceive yourselves, for though you had defeated the whole army of the Chaldeans who fight against you, and there remained only wounded men among them, they would rise up, every man in his tent, and burn the city with fire." Jeremiah chapter 37, verse 9 and 10. The remnants of Judah were to go into captivity and learn through adversity the lessons they had refused to learn under more favorable circumstances. Among the righteous still in Jerusalem were some who determined to safeguard the sacred ark, containing the tablets of stone on which God had written the 10 Commandments, placing it beyond the reach of ruthless hands. With mourning they concealed the ark in a cave. It was hidden from Israel because of their sins, and was never to be restored to them. That sacred ark is still hidden. Now, as the doomed city was about to fall into the hands of the heathen, Jeremiah considered his work done and tried to leave. He was prevented by an officer who reported that he was about to join the Babylonians. The prophet denied the lying charge, but the princes were angry with Jeremiah, and they struck him and put him in prison. Verse 15. The hopes that had sprung up when the armies of Nebuchadnezzar turned to meet the Egyptians were soon dashed to the ground. The military might of Egypt was no more than a broken reed. Inspiration had declared, "I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon, but the arms of Pharaoh shall fall down. They shall know that I am the Lord, when I put my sword into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he stretches it out against the land of Egypt." Ezekiel chapter 30, verse 25. A vacillating king's secret rendezvous. While the princes were still vainly looking toward Egypt for help, King Zedekiah was thinking of the prophet of God who had been put in prison. After many days the king sent for him and asked him secretly, "Is there any word from the Lord?" And Jeremiah said, "There is." Then he said, "You shall be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon." Moreover, Jeremiah said to King Zedekiah, "Where are now your prophets who prophesied to you, saying, 'The king of Babylon will not come against you or against this land'? Therefore please hear now, O my lord the king, and do not make me return to the house of Jonathan the scribe, lest I die there." Jeremiah chapter 37, verses 17 through 20. At this, Zedekiah commanded that they commit Jeremiah to the court of the prison, and that they should give him daily a piece of bread from the baker's street, until all the bread in the city was gone. Verse 21. The king dared not openly show any faith in Jeremiah, though fear drove him to seek information privately. He was too weak to risk the disapproval of his princes and people by submitting to the will of God as the prophet had declared it. Jeremiah continued to advise submission to the Babylonian rule. "He who remains in this city shall die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence, but he who goes over to the Chaldeans shall live." Jeremiah chapter 38, verse 2. At last the princes, enraged over the counsels that were contrary to their policy of resistance, protested vigorously to the king. The prophet was an enemy to the nation. He should be put to death. An Ethiopian saves Jeremiah's life. The cowardly king knew that the charges were false, but to satisfy those who were high and influential in the nation, he gave Jeremiah to them to do as they pleased. They put the prophet into the dungeon of Malchiah, and they let Jeremiah down with ropes. And in the dungeon there was no water, but mire. So Jeremiah sank in the mire. Verse 6. But God raised up friends for him, who made requests of the king, and had him again removed to the court of the prison. Once more the king sent privately for Jeremiah, and asked him to relate God's intention concerning Jerusalem. Jeremiah inquired, If I declare it to you, will you not surely put me to death? And if I give you advice, you will not listen to me?" The king entered into a secret agreement with the prophet. "As the Lord lives, I will not put you to death, nor will I give you into the hand of these men who seek your life." Verses 15 and 16. There was still opportunity for the king to heed the warnings, and in this way dilute with mercy the judgments falling on city and nation. "If you will only surrender to the officials of the king of Babylon," was the message Jeremiah gave the king, "then your life shall be spared, and this city shall not be burned with fire, and you and your house shall live. But if you do not surrender, then this city shall be handed over to the Chaldeans, and they shall burn it with fire, and you yourself shall not escape from their hand." Verses 17 and 18, NRSV. "I am afraid of the Judeans who have deserted to the Chaldeans," the king replied, "for I might be handed over to them, and they would abuse me." But the prophet promised, "That will not happen." And he added the earnest plea, "Just obey the voice of the Lord in what I say to you, and it shall go well with you, and your life shall be spared." Verses 19 and 20, NRSV. If the king had chosen to obey, lives might have been spared and the city saved from fire. But he thought he had gone too far to retrace his steps. He was afraid of ridicule, afraid for his life. After years of rebellion against God, Zedekiah thought it would be too humiliating to say to his people, "I accept the word of the Lord as spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. I dare not venture to war against the enemy." Zedekiah has no moral stamina. With tears, Jeremiah pleaded with Zedekiah to save himself and his people. He assured him that unless he obeyed the counsel of God, he could not escape with his life, and all his possessions would fall to the Babylonians. But the king would not retrace his steps. He decided to follow the counsel of the false prophets. He became a cowering slave to public opinion, with no real intent to do evil. He also had no determination to stand boldly for the right. The king was even too weak to be willing for people to know that he had held a conference with Jeremiah. If Zedekiah had bravely declared that he believed the words of the prophet, already half fulfilled, what desolation he might have prevented. He should have said, "I will obey the Lord and save the city from utter ruin. I love truth, I hate sin, and I will follow the counsel of the Mighty One of Israel." The people would have respected Zedekiah's courageous spirit, and those who were wavering between faith and unbelief would have taken a firm stand for the right. The fearlessness and justice of this course would have inspired admiration and loyalty. Judah would have been spared the untold woe of bloodshed, famine, and fire. Zedekiah's weakness was a sin for which he paid a fearful penalty. The enemy swept down like a resistless avalanche and devastated the city. The Hebrew armies were beaten back in confusion. Zedekiah was taken prisoner, his sons executed before his eyes. The king was led from Jerusalem as a captive. His eyes were put out, and after arriving in Babylon, he perished miserably. The beautiful temple that for centuries had crowned Mount Zion was not spared. They burned the house of God, broke down the wall of Jerusalem, burned all its palaces with fire, and destroyed all its precious possessions. 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 19. The chief of the priests, officers, and princes were taken to Babylon and executed as traitors. Others were carried captive to live in servitude to Nebuchadnezzar and his sons. The Babylonians respect Jeremiah. Of Jeremiah it is recorded, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, gave charge concerning Jeremiah to Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, saying, "Take him and do him no harm, but do to him just as he says to you." Jeremiah chapter 39, verse 11 and 12. Released from prison by the Babylonian officers, the prophet chose to stay with the feeble remnant left by the Chaldeans to be vine dressers and farmers. Jeremiah chapter 52, verse 16. Over these the Babylonians set Gedaliah as governor. Only a few months passed before the governor was treacherously killed. After passing through many difficulties, the people were persuaded to take refuge in Egypt. Jeremiah lifted his voice in protest against this move. "Do not go to Egypt," he pleaded. But the people did not listen to the inspired counsel, and all the remnants of Judah fled into Egypt. They did not obey the voice of the Lord. Jeremiah chapter 43, verses 2, 5, and 7. The book of Lamentations reveals the prophet's sorrow over the stubborn rebellion of those who should have been the light of the world, and over the fate of Zion and the people carried captive to Babylon. Jeremiah left these laments on record as a memorial of the folly of turning from the counsels of Jehovah to human wisdom. Amid the ruin, Jeremiah could still declare, "Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed." His constant prayer was, "Let us search out and examine our ways, and turn back to the Lord." Lamentations chapter 3, verse 22 and 40. But now Zion was completely destroyed, and the people of God were in captivity. Overwhelmed with grief, the prophet exclaimed, "How lonely sits the city, that once was full of people! How like a widow has she become, she that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah finds no resting place. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan. Her young girls grieve, and her lot is bitter. Her foes have become the masters. Her enemies prosper. How the Lord, in his anger, has humiliated daughter Zion. He has thrown down from heaven to earth the splendor of Israel. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. He has bent his bow like an enemy, with his right hand set like a foe. He has killed all in whom we took pride, in the tent of daughter Zion. He has poured out his fury like fire. Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Our ancestors sinned, they are no more, and we bear their iniquities. Slaves rule over us. There is no one to deliver us from their hand. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old. Lamentations chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, chapter 2, verses 1 and 4, chapter 5, verses 1 through 8 and 21, NRSV.